Dear friends, a happy Navratri to you all. Today we have James Sir again with us. On the request of so many of you for further videos and further sessions by Sir, today we bring James Sir for a session on Pluto. As we all know, Sir has a big hold on these three planets. Most of us Indians in Vedic astrology don't even consider these three planets. We already have done a video on Uranus. So let us continue with the series on Pluto. Sir, welcome.
Thank you.
Sir has also written so many beautiful books. These books are worth every penny that you will spend. Just sharing some of his best books. So this is one book which Sir has done it again, redone it with lots of changes. Ancient Hindu astrology for the modern Western astrology. And the other book that is recently done by Sir is the James Braha Sutras.
Yes, and that other book, The Ancient Hindu Astrology, is the revised book. It was written in 1985. Yes. This is the 2020 version. Okay.
Yes.
So let's get to, and these books they can buy on ebooks from Google Play and Barnes and Noble.
Yes, I have already given the link in my YouTube.
Okay. So the first thing, before I get to the meaning of Pluto, I want to mention something that is very important. This is about the transits of major planets into new signs. Most of mundane astrology I find to be nonsense. What I mean by that is when there's many planets that are all in one sign, or many planets doing bad things, or anything, this has never happened for 500 years. The truth is, most of that is nonsense. It might have some effect on a country whose birth chart those planets affect, but when you try to, like for example, the 1987 harmonic convergence, all the planets were lined up in a certain way, heaven on earth was coming, and then 13 years later we had 2001, 9/11, the world went crazy. It's been way worse than, I'd easily like to go back to 1987. The harmonic convergence did nothing. And most of those things where, they've never been aligned like this, they mostly do nothing. However, when a major planet enters a new sign, you can usually track the effects that it has. And when I wrote if you can see in the background, all my books are there. There's one that's orange.
Yes.
That's called How to Predict Your Future. And it's mainly Western transits. When I was writing that book, I said, I have to look at when the Western transits enter someone's house. It would go Saturn through the first house, Saturn through the second, Jupiter through the first, Jupiter through the second. But then I realized, this changes from the sidereal zodiac to the tropical zodiac. They are different. And when I was writing that book, I was shocked to find that when a planet went into somebody's new house, their third house, their fourth house, first it would go in usually from the Western system. There would be a noticeable effect. And then some months later, when it would go into that house in the sidereal zodiac, in the Hindu chart, there would also be an effect. I was very surprised by that. And what I noticed was that when it had gone in to one zodiac house and then the other zodiac, it would go into that house, the effects would be doubled. They would be more strong because it was the planet transiting the house in both systems. It would get stronger. In any case, I'm just going to mention something about Pluto and you'll understand why in a minute.
Right.
When Pluto entered Leo in 1939 in the tropical, the Western zodiac, it was the best year for film ever. So if you Google best year of film, it's going to say 1939. Gone with the Wind, I think Wizard of Oz, and there were 365 films made, which was way more than usual because Pluto had entered the sign of entertainment. But clearly it was the best year for film. That's just a fact. In 1953, when Pluto went into Leo in the sidereal zodiac, there was a change in film because Marlon Brando came on to the movie screen with a film. I think it was, I don't know, I think it was On the Waterfront, but whatever it was the most realistic, natural performance ever. And the whole field of acting and films were altered again by that one performance, by that one film. In 1995, in the tropical zodiac, Pluto entered Sagittarius, the sign of the law, and we had the O.J. Simpson murder trial. It occurred, the trial actually occurred, the very beginning of the trial, the murder happened earlier, maybe in middle of 1994, but in I think it was January 1995, whatever months it was, as soon as it went into Sagittarius, the trial began. And for 1 year, all that you saw on the news was the O.J. Simpson trial. The law, our law justice system that's Pluto in Sagittarius. When Pluto entered Capricorn in the tropical system, the Western system, was 2008, and the economic system collapsed. That was Pluto in Capricorn in the Western system. Capricorn is the existing order of things. It's institutions, and it's basically the prevailing order, the typical institutions, organizations, and they cracked because of the banking system collapsed. That was 2008. In 2020, February, Pluto went into Capricorn in the sidereal zodiac, which we use in the Hindu horoscopes, in the Vedic charts. So in 2020, we had the pandemic and we had the assault on the United States Capitol. It was a huge occurrence, okay? Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because Pluto will not leave Capricorn in the sidereal zodiac until 2037. It's a long way off. It started 2020, it'll go till 2037. But Pluto hit Capricorn in 2008 in the tropical. It's going to hit the tropical Aquarius. Pluto is almost finished Capricorn in the Western. It's going to hit Aquarius in March, April, May of 2023.
Okay.
Next year. Then it's going to back up. And in February 2024, it's going to come again. You're going to see effects in 2023, most likely, and definitely in 2024. So Aquarius is the sign of science. It's the sign of humanitarian efforts. It's an air sign. It's intellectual. It's about universal welfare, Pluto is universal welfare. It's about humanitarian efforts, but it's also science. Okay, so next year, March, April, May of next year, and then throughout 2023, and certainly in the beginning of 2024, keep your eye out for what goes on with science. Keep your eye out for what goes on with humanitarian efforts. And keep your eye on groups. Aquarius is like the 11th house. It's the sign of group activity. So I think we're going to see some interesting stuff. And possibly, with Pluto, some of the times it's positive and some of the times it's negative. If it's positive, what we will see is a return to facts. Aquarius is the truth. It's facts. It's factual. So I'm hoping that what we see is a return to where both the conservatives and the liberals can begin to agree on facts rather than, well, we don't care about the facts, we're going to say it this way. That's what I'm hoping for. Now, if it goes the other way, it will be far worse. it'll be far worse. But I actually think that it's going to bring us to a return to the reasoning, to the intellectual, and to the humanitarian efforts. I'm fairly sure it's going to knock the heck out of groups. I don't know what groups they will be, but I think it's going to have a big effect on group activity.
Maybe some secretive groups. Because Aquarius is also about secrets, research.
Groups. It's about groups.
Groups,
and friends.
yeah.
Groups and friends.
Yes.
Okay, now let's get to Pluto. Pluto is actually one of my favorite planets because it's so powerful in my own horoscope. Pluto in my Western chart aspects more planets than anything. It's angular. It's just very strong. Pluto was discovered around I believe it was around 1930. It was around the time that they began work on the atomic bomb. It was around the time when the mafia became very, very big. It was around the time of dictatorship, Mussolini, Hitler. When Pluto got discovered, you had atomic bombs, you had the mafia, you had dictators. Okay. Of course, that's the negative side of Pluto. So Pluto is it's the most intense planet. When you watch an Al Pacino movie, you're looking at Pluto. That's Pluto. When you hear James Braha get very intense about something, you're seeing my Pluto. I don't have any planets in Scorpio. Pluto rules Scorpio. I don't have planets in Scorpio, but I have a great intensity, and it comes from Pluto being very dominant in my horoscope. Now, the thing that is very, very odd and very essential to understand is that Pluto can go either way. You're going to see a lot of criminals in prison because they have a real strong Pluto. And when something hurts them, they get very intense and they will do anything to get their way. That's the negative side of Pluto. Pluto is also spiritual welfare. You're going to find, there's Uranus, there's Neptune, there's Pluto. The outer planets are the spiritual planets. And you're going to find that people that have a very strong Uranus, they'll be involved in astrology and psychic phenomenon, helping humanitarian efforts. When you have a person with Neptune, you have a person who's very mystical and psychic and dreaming of the gods and things. It's a spiritual planet that way. Pluto is different. It's a spiritual planet. But Pluto is the last planet to be discovered. It's more powerful. First came Uranus, then came Neptune, then came Pluto. So Pluto is the most intense out of all the planets. It moves slower than all the others. So Pluto on the spiritual side is universal welfare. So when you find a person who's Plutonian, they are going to try to help the world as much as they can. When I was 20, all I cared about was enlightenment. From 20 to 30, I taught meditation. Then I went into the Rahu Dasha, and it all changed. I was much more concerned with what I could do to help others, to help the world. That's universal welfare. That's the positive side of Pluto. But the negative side is very, very intense and causes all kinds of problems. For anybody that studies the tarot cards, you have 22 major cards. You have the 1, which is communications, the 2, the 3, the 5 is luck, the 9 is the hermit. All those numbers from 1 to 21 have a very specific meaning. But when you get to number 22, it's the Fool. It's the Fool. That means the Fool can either be, when you're doing tarot and you throw the 22 card, you say, oh, the person is either being completely silly and foolish, or they look like the Fool, but actually they are the hermit, the guru. They are the wise one. It goes either way, okay? And if you don't understand that about Pluto, you'll never understand it. So let's go through the houses. So Pluto in the first house, first of all, whenever you look at anything in the first house, you always look to see how close that planet is to the ascendant degree. There is no comparison between Saturn at 5 degrees Taurus when the ascendant is 4 degrees Taurus versus 4-degree Taurus ascendant and Saturn in 20 degrees. There's a big difference. It's still Saturn in the first, but there's a big difference. So Pluto, if it's on the ascendant, is going to be quite different from Pluto in the 20 degrees away from the ascendant. It's still in the first house, but you must do that. This is not so important with the other houses. It's important with the 7th house, with the 10th house, with the 4th house, but it gets a little complicated. For the Hindus, for the Hindu chart, it's the ascendant and the 7th. Look and see how close it is to that angle. For the Westerners, it's the 4th house cusp and the 10th house cusp. It's a little different. Anyway, and the 1st and 7th. Anyway, if Pluto is in the first house, not too close to the ascendant, but if Pluto is in the first house, then you have a person who is Plutonian. That means they are intense. Pluto is power. It's the atomic bomb. It's power. So the person with Pluto in the first house is either going to be extremely spiritual, concerned with universal welfare, wanting to help everybody, but they can also be very domineering. It can be kind of like Rahu in a way. The Plutonian person is very intense. I went to the doctor recently, and I know I have to lower my cholesterol and lose some weight, but this guy was so intense about it that I stopped with the sugars. I stopped with the junk food. I've already started losing weight. He broke my sugar addiction because his intensity was so strong that I heard what he said. It had an impact. So Pluto people are going to be intense. Now, they're also going to be enormously sensitive. It's like Scorpio, people are sensitive. Their desires are intense and they're sensitive. So the closer that Pluto gets to the ascendant degree, the more sensitive the person's going to become. And when Pluto is within 4 or 5 degrees of the ascendant, what happens is that person is so sensitive and people are constantly giving them feedback. Hey, you're being too extravagant. Hey, you're being too mean. Hey, you're being too nice. They're going to get feedback. My belief about this is that when Pluto is in the first house, and even more so when it's close to the ascendant, but if Pluto is in the first house, Pluto is transformation. Pluto is actually a planet that regenerates the cellular structure. So if you have a Pluto transit, if you have a Pluto hits your sun, Pluto hits your moon, Pluto hits the first house cusp, it's like an explosion. It's like an earthquake. And that's in the transit. And there's a complete regeneration. The cellular structure begins to regenerate itself. So when a person has Pluto in the first house or near the ascendant, they are going to get feedback their entire life to try to work on the personality level to balance the personality. So what I mean by this is that most likely a person that has Pluto in the first or on the ascendant, they probably in past lives were too intense, too domineering, too unbalanced. Now Pluto's in the first house, they're extremely sensitive. And people are constantly telling them, do that, be this way, don't be that way. So there's a commitment on the subconscious level to try to become more balanced. They are extremely sensitive. That'll be the case wherever Pluto is in the first house. But when it's near the ascendant, their sensitivity is enormous. And there's nothing they can do to stop the other people from giving them feedback. It's going to happen, nothing they can do about it. So better they should accept it, think about it, and not be defensive. That person's going to want universal welfare. They're going to want spirituality. Now, one thing about Pluto, because Pluto can go either way, you have to look at the whole horoscope to see whether it's more likely to be good or bad. For example, if Pluto is in the fifth house, there's going to be some intense, explosive, dramatic fifth house experience. This could be a child who is, you have a child, because the fifth house is children, that has enormous problems. However, it could also be a famous, powerful child. We go either way. So that's why you have to look at what else is going on with the fifth house. In the Hindu chart, is the fifth house ruler fallen and 2 degrees away from Ketu? Then you know the Pluto in the fifth is going to be bad, terrible. If Pluto's in the fourth house, the mother could be very powerful and universal welfare, or she could be a disaster. You're going to have to analyze the other features. Okay. So that's the Pluto in the first. Now, the other thing about Pluto in the first is that the person is a survivor. They can survive anything. Pluto was discovered when the atomic bomb, the mafia, the dictators, it's powerful, could be used negative or positive. But if that person has to go through a lot of trouble, they're going to survive. They're going to get through it. You know, some people have a very bad childhood, they never get over it. Some people have a bad childhood, they get over it because they got that power, and Pluto in the first will give them that. Pluto in the second house is usually about money. As soon as I see Pluto in the second house, I begin to think this person wants to be a millionaire. They've got a huge intensity about money, usually. Now, there's an odd thing about the second house. Isabel Hickey, Western astrologer, hold on one second. I don't understand why that light blinked.
Yes.
I think it's highlighting the
Beautiful, yes.
Yeah.
So
anyway, Pluto in the second house, there's an odd thing about it. Western astrologer Isabel Hickey used to say that the second house is money, but it's also your sense of your own value. This is different from confidence. It's about, what am I worth? Do I deserve to be paid a lot of money? Or do I believe I'm not worth much? It's a concept I'm just throwing out because the second house, now something I need to say here. I started with Western astrology. I learned Western astrology for about 5 years before I went to India. So some, not all, but some of what I'm going to say about Pluto has been really affected by what I know from the Western system. You'll see why as I go along. So that concept of Pluto in the second it's a little bit more Western when I talk about the self-value. For example, the second house in the Hindu system is family life. It is possible. I cannot, if you know James Braha, you know I will not speak about theory. I will only speak about what I know. But here comes a little bit of theory. It is possible that Pluto in the second house might affect a person's family life intensely. Might. I say might because I haven't really looked at the outer planets in the Hindu system as much as from the Western. When I'm looking at family life, I'm looking at the Hindu chart. Is Mars in the second? Is Saturn? That's what I'm looking at. But you want to keep an eye on Pluto in the second. Might be having a big effect on family life. Might be. But mainly what I'm looking at is money. Now, if it's a disastrous Pluto, in the Western chart, you would say it's disastrous because maybe Saturn is squaring Pluto or opposing, or some Uranus is squaring the Pluto.
Yeah.
So it's going to relate to money. More than anything, I would look at money. And whenever I see Pluto in the second house, I immediately start to look to see, is this person likely to be wealthy? But it could also, if it's a negative Pluto, it could also be something where there was possibly extreme poverty. I'm telling you, it can go either way. However, no matter which way it goes in the beginning days, as time goes by, in the same way Pluto in the first house makes a person a survivor, Pluto in the second house, no matter how bad the money is, might still become a millionaire because there's such an intense energy in the house of money. Like that. Now, Pluto in the third house, you're going to look for intense experiences with relatives and brothers and sisters. Intense, whether it's extreme negative or extreme positive, it's going to be with relatives and brothers and sisters. However, in the Western chart, the third house is the mind and the communications. This is different from the Hindu, where the second is communications and the fifth is the mind. But I can tell you, if that Pluto is in the third house, that person's going to have a compulsion to communicate. They're going to have a compulsion to talk, write, teach, speak, etc. The mind is also going to be more on the spiritual side. They are more likely to be open to the mysticism and things like that. However, the person could also have some mental issues. They could have mental issues if it goes the other way. And for that, I would be looking in the Hindu chart, fifth house and Mercury. Okay. But usually the third house, Pluto, the person's going to be just intense about communications. And they're going to be intense about brothers and sisters. And they could have brothers and sisters that are either extremely intense and powerful or have huge problems. So I think with Pluto, you're really going to have to, especially when you're talking about it from the Hindu system, I think you're really going to have to, it gives you an idea of how it's going to work, but because it can go positive or negative, you're going to have to look at the rest of the horoscope to see whether it's likely to be more of a positive or a negative. Remember the image of the tarot card Fool. The Fool is either silly and foolish, or they look foolish, but in fact, they're more spiritual and wise than anybody. It can go either way. Pluto in the fourth house, I have to say, it's very rare that I've seen Pluto in the fourth house be a positive influence for the mother. It's too intense of an influence when it's in the fourth house. So it will either mean a mother that died, a mother that had intense problems, a mother that was domineering and intense and smothering. On the positive side, that's usually what it's going to mean. If it's Pluto conjunct Jupiter, Pluto conjunct Venus in the fourth, then you might have a great artist mother, Pluto Venus, or Pluto Jupiter. It might be on the positive side if they're closely conjunct. Pluto in the fourth house, that person's going to love the land. They're going to have an intense relationship with property, with land. So I have Pluto close to my, in the Western chart, close to my fourth house cusp. Not real close, but close enough. And, you know, I had 40 fruit trees in the house I lived in. We just moved. But in my old house, I had 40 fruit trees. I loved the land. The house I bought had a double lot, so I had a big piece of property. Love the land, okay? I love putting on extra rooms on houses. So Pluto in the fourth house is going to give a great intensity with land, homes, and real estate. In the Western chart, the fourth house has a lot to do with your ancestors. In the Western chart, the fourth house is your ancestors, and the fourth house is what you got from your ancestors. And in the Western chart, it's the family life. So when a person has any major planet like Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto in the fourth house, they are going to have an intense relationship with their mother. The fourth house is the mother. You got Pluto in the fourth house, there's going to be an intensity, not just to the mother. The mother could have died, could have had big problems, you know, something very intense about the mother. But it also means that the relationship with the mother, because Pluto, it's enormously sensitive. So there's a sensitivity to the mother. And when you understand Pluto, you're going to read that Pluto is the higher octave of Mars. So Mars is aggression. Pluto's the atomic bomb. It's the mafia. It's the dictators. Okay. So it's in the same way Neptune is a higher octave of Venus. Uranus is a higher octave of Mercury. Pluto is the higher octave of Mars. That's why you see the Marsy people, they go to prison because they're doing intense, because their desires are so strong, right? Their desires are so strong, they will steal, they will kill to get what they want. On the negative side, of course. However, Isabel Hickey, who was extremely psychic, she has this Western astrology book called Astrology, a Cosmic Science. It is the best Western astrology book ever written, in my opinion. And she said that Pluto is actually the higher octave of the moon. Now, Pluto is definitely connected to Scorpio. Mars is connected to Scorpio. So Pluto is a higher octave of Mars. But as a Pluto person, I believe that she's correct, that Pluto is somehow also connected to the moon. And the reason I say that is because the sensitivity that comes from Pluto is so enormous that it becomes emotional. So the person who winds up in prison, it's not always that their desire was so strong that they had to steal or murder the higher Mars. That's part of it. But the other part of it is, let's say that you insult somebody who is very Plutonian, humiliate someone who is extremely Plutonian, it hits their sensitivity beyond belief, like it's a higher octave of the moon. And those people will go to extraordinary lengths because they've been hurt emotionally. There's a book called Why They Kill. There's a book a friend told me about. It's called Why They Kill, or Why People Kill. And there's so many stories in there where the guy said, this guy, he insulted me. I had to kill him. It's like crazy. But those are Plutonian. It's just so emotional. So Pluto could be the higher Mars, or it could be the higher moon. It's extreme sensitivity. So there's an extreme sensitivity to the mother. And the mother is likely to have some, it's hard to get to the essence of it because Pluto could kill the mother. Now, listen, please, oh God, I just realized people take this stuff so literally. Yes, Pluto in the fourth house could mean the mother died, but you don't say, oh, Pluto's in the fourth house, the mother's going to die. That's not how it works. But if the mother dies early and you see Pluto in the fourth house, you'll know that was one part of it. Okay. So what I'm saying is Pluto kind of explodes things. It's like when Pluto hits the seventh house cusp, the marriage just explodes sometimes. Or Pluto transits into the first house. Suddenly the person feels like an earthquake has occurred and their personality changes. So when Pluto's in a house, it's going to usually indicate some enormously karmic experience. So Saturn is pure karma. If Saturn's in a house, karma is coming back. If Uranus is in a house, karma is going to be there as well in a very sudden transformative way, but Pluto is likely in any house to be some hidden experience that's enormous, or just some blatant, intense, and you don't know what it is. And as an astrologer, you don't have to know exactly what it is. All you know is if Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto are in a house, there's going to be major effects. And so Uranus is uncontrollable, erratic, volatile. Neptune is illusion, deception. It erodes wherever it is. Pluto is like some kind of explosive experience has occurred in that house. The mother may have had a horrific life, or it could be anything, and you don't have to know exactly what it is. The other planets, using the Hindu system, will tell you more specifically what it is that happened. You see, if the ruler of the fourth house is right next to Ketu, there's no question, the mother's crazy. If Pluto's in the fourth and you have that, or if the fourth house ruler is right next to Saturn and Pluto is there, the Pluto tells you how intense it is. The fact that the ruler of the house is next to Saturn will give you, oh, there was restriction, there was extreme poverty, extreme restriction, extreme karma, like that. So you can't know exactly what Pluto's going to do. It's easier to, if Neptune's in the fourth house, the mother is probably unstable. If Uranus is in the fourth house, the mother's probably erratic and uncontrollable. When Pluto's there, you don't know what it is. You just know there's extreme. It's the most extreme. Pluto in the fifth house is one of the greatest artistic aspects you can have. In the same way, Pluto in the third house gives a compulsion to communicate, write, teach, communicate languages. Pluto in the fifth house is a compulsion to create. That becomes artistic. Some of the greatest artists have Pluto in the fifth house. However, Pluto in the fifth house is going to be not so good for love affairs. The seventh house is marriage. The fifth house is love affairs, which in India for generations has had no meaning at all because there were no love affairs. But today that's changing. I mean, people in India may have had love affairs hidden from their wife. That may have gone on for thousands of years. But, you know, in the West, you can have a transit of the fifth house where there's a love affair and it's fun, but it's not marriage. It's just fun. Anyway, Pluto in the fifth house is definitely going to be some intensity with children. If it's on the negative side, and you can look at the whole horoscope with Jupiter and the fifth house in the Vedic chart, then Pluto in the fifth house is going to intensify that. So let's say that in the Hindu chart, the fifth house is rough or difficult, but Pluto's not in the fifth house. You can describe there's difficulties with the children, they have some problems, or you have problems with them. But if the fifth house is afflicted and Pluto is in the fifth house, look out. Because now you're talking about the bigger problems. The child is born with physical handicaps, or it intensifies. On the other hand, if Jupiter is aspecting the fifth house ruler's conjunct Venus or a full moon, and Pluto's in the fifth, child's probably going to be famous. You can't predict but you know it's something very intense. Same with investments and speculations. The Pluto in the fifth house is going to be a compulsion to create. It's also going to be a compulsion to invest. But it could be disastrous, or it could be great. You have to look at everything else with the fifth house. Might be connected to Purva Punya, past life credit. You want to look and see what's going on, you know, elsewise in the fifth house. Pluto in the sixth house is a compulsion toward health and healing matters. The person might want to be a doctor, they might want to be a nurse. That's on the positive side. If the sixth house is otherwise afflicted, that Pluto in the sixth is going to give serious health problems. If Pluto's in the sixth house and the sixth house is in any way afflicted, there's going to be troubles with coworkers, bosses, employers, employees. In those cases, I tell a person, don't work for somebody, try to create your own job. But even then, if they have a company and they've got workers for them, they can cause troubles. But Pluto in the sixth house makes me think the person is compulsive about understanding health and healing matters, medicines, spiritual healing methods, alternative healing methods. So that's mainly health and healing, whether it's for healing other people or for your own health and healing. And it's also going to involve the workplace, co-workers, the workplace, things like that. If you're looking at the Hindu horoscope and you see troubles with enemies and competitors and jealous people, and Pluto's there, then look out. On the other hand, if there's no problems with, you know, let's say Venus and Moon are in the sixth house, benefics in the sixth with Pluto, then you could have a situation where you actually get very good results from coworkers and bosses and employers, employees. Pluto in the seventh house, I don't think I've ever seen Pluto in the seventh house not create enormous, intense transformation in marriage. So Pluto is a planet of transformation. It rules the cellular structure. It regenerates, okay? So Pluto in the first house, the person's constantly through their whole life going to be analyzing, how do I get better? How do I make myself more talented, more, whatever it is, they're going to want to regenerate and transform the personality and make it better and better. But it's going to be painful. Pluto is painful. It's enormously sensitive. Pluto in the seventh house, the person's greatest growth in life is likely to occur in the house that Pluto is in. So Pluto's in my fourth house. My mother had mental illness. there was enormous transformation and growth. It was such a difficult experience to have a crazy mother, but that caused enormous growth, self-improvement. I went for spiritual techniques, self-improvement, therapies, anything to improve from what that enormous, karmic debt created. So Pluto in the first house, the person's always going to be working on themselves because they're so sensitive and transforming the personality. Pluto in the seventh, marriage is never easy. I've never seen it easy. Pluto in the seventh house is where your greatest growth will take place because there's enormous sensitivity with the partner and there's constant dealing with these issues. Well, you're behaving this way and you're hurting me this way. Well, the other person says you're doing this to me. And so you keep having to transform the marriage. It's never easy. I've never seen it be easy. Very powerful. You could get
in the seventh house Pluto, the spouse will get transformations like first house is self-transformation.
The seventh house Pluto means the partner's going to be Plutonian. So the partner's probably going to be domineering, intense. The transformation that takes place for the Pluto in this is going to be more for the person that has Pluto in the seventh. If I have Pluto in the seventh, I'm always going to be having these intense experiences. The same way I had intense experiences with my mother, more than my brothers didn't have Pluto in the fourth house. Okay. They had their own problems with the mother being crazy. But I would deal directly with her. I would argue and I would go through all sorts of, they wouldn't. They would go to therapy, they would have problems, but I would deal directly with her. You see, so if a person has Pluto in the seventh, the partner's going to be a certain way, which is probably going to be difficult in some way. And the person with Pluto in the seventh, it's just constant transformation of the marriage. So if you talk to someone who's 45 or 50 and you say, oh, you got Pluto in the seventh house, so you've had enormous emotional experiences with the spouse. They say it never ends. It never ends. But if you ask them, when you got married at the age of 20, it was a certain way. Now you're 45 and you still go through this. How much growth has taken place? They'll say, oh, enormous. The growth never ends. The transformation never ends, but the growth process is huge. Yeah. So that's basically that. There might be, with Pluto in the seventh house, there might be a tendency to want to do business. Seventh house is business and things like that, but mainly it's going to be about marriage. Now, if you're unlucky, you have married a criminal. If you are unlucky, you've married a mafia or a criminal or someone who's got, huge, Pluto's a higher Mars. That person could be domineering, intense, Pluto in the eighth house is one of the best placements, I think, for astrology, metaphysics, things like that. But Pluto in the eighth house, the person is likely to have a lot of funerals to go to. Death and rebirth. They will be interested in astral travel. They will be interested in near-death experiences. They will go to more funerals. When there is a funeral, it'll have a bigger impact on them, like that. Pluto in the eighth. Pluto in the eighth is very powerful for the metaphysical, psychic, metaphysical, things like that. The eighth house is a Scorpio house, and therefore, Scorpio is a sign of very, very deep intensity because it's ruled by Pluto. Scorpio is a house of deep attachment and pain and suffering from attachment. Human beings suffer for three reasons. One is grief, but that's different. if somebody dies, I don't care how enlightened you are, if a loved one dies, you suffer from grief. That's one thing. The other reasons people suffer is only two reasons. They're in physical pain, or they have some attachment that is not getting fulfilled, some desire that is not getting fulfilled, which means, you know, if someone says, oh, James, you're too heavy, like, oh, I might feel bad because I don't want to be heavy, right? But if they say, James, you're too heavy, I go, yeah, I'm heavy, doesn't bother me, then the attachment's gone, right? Or, oh, you don't look good, or, oh, whatever, oh, you're stupid, whatever it is. If you don't care about being intelligent and someone says you're stupid, you go, yeah, I know, it's not a big deal for me. No attachment, okay? But if you're attached to being intelligent and they say, oh, you made a mistake, you get all upset. That's the attachment. The 8th house is the house of Scorpio. It's the house of attachment. When a major planet when Saturn transits the 8th, or Uranus or Pluto transits the 8th, during those years, your buttons are going to get pressed. They're going to get pressed because you have attachments. So when the transit is going on, you start, oh, I'm in pain, and you start to work on it, right? But if you have Pluto in the 8th house natally, it's nonstop. In the same way, the person with Pluto in the 7th house, nonstop transformation of relationships. Pluto in the 8th house, the entire lifetime, the person is going to be intent on working on the attachments. When their button gets pressed, it hurts badly. So they try to, why am I attached to that? Like that. So it's a very powerful placement. It's like having Pluto in Scorpio, Pluto in its own sign. But if you're not spiritual and you're not willing to work on it, it's disastrous. Disastrous. The suffering will be intense. So that could be said to be one of the greatest houses for suffering if the person isn't spiritual and able to work on it. Pluto in the 9th house is mainly going to be people that are compulsive about religion, philosophy, higher knowledge. As an astrologer, I see many people with Pluto in the 9th because they want to know everything about religion and philosophy and gurus. Now, on the negative side, if the 9th house is afflicted in the Hindu horoscope, there could be some enormous painful experiences with gurus or spiritual teachers or religion or something like that. But mostly Pluto in the 9th house seems to me to be a real strong desire for moksha. No, sorry, not moksha. A real strong desire for religion, ritual, yagyas, prayers, like that, not moksha. Pluto in the 9th is also going to affect universities and colleges. So if the 9th house is strong and Pluto is there, you're going to have very powerful, transformative experiences on the college level or in the universities, and you might want to be a college professor. With the law, with lawyers and judges, again, there could be very intense, transformative, disastrous, possibly experiences with judges or lawyers. If Pluto's in the 9th house and the 9th house is afflicted, you always settle out of court. You could be 98% in the right and you go to court. And if you have bad 9th house, the judge is not in a good mood that day and you know, finds against you. The 10th house, Pluto in the 10th house. Pluto in the 10th house is a compulsion for fame, power, status. Again, if the 10th house is good, that Pluto in the 10th house is going to be very, very powerful for status and fame. The Pluto in the 10th house is very often intense experiences with the father. The father may have died early. The father may have been domineering. The father may have been too intense of an influence. Again, you don't know whether the Pluto is going to be more on the positive side or the negative side. The Pluto in the 10th house, if any placement is going to want a person to work for universal welfare, it's going to be Pluto in the 10th. And when Pluto transits the 10th house, I tell the person, this is the time, if you've been wanting to do something for the world, this is the time to do it. You have the most intense energy in the career area. So Pluto in the 10th can be very intense, powerful experiences in the career, and for fame and recognition, and for the father. But if it's negative, if the 9th house is otherwise negative, that Pluto in the 10th is going to be very bad on the father, either in the father's life or in the relationship with the father, you know, anything like that. I don't know what else, you know, Pluto would be. To me, that's, if I see, like I said, if Pluto's in the 2nd, I immediately think wants to be a millionaire. Pluto in the 10th, I immediately think wants to do something universal welfare or wants to be famous. But I immediately also think there may have been something very intense with the father, intense relationship with the father, or the father could have been famous, or the father could have, you know, died or something like that. Pluto, I mentioned death so much because Pluto, it's the ruler of Scorpio, the 8th house ruler, which is death. But I don't mean that you should always, I don't mean that you should predict it. I mean that when the person says, yes, my father died early, the Pluto in the 10th is you know, is going to be, oh, well, that makes sense. But I don't, if Pluto's in the 4th, I never say your mother died early, unless I see a lot of other 4th house problems. I don't say, oh, the father may have died early, unless there's a lot of other 10th house afflictions. And then I may say it. I may say, did your father die early? You know, Pluto in the 11th house is going to be intense, powerful, famous friends on the positive side. Huh?
Groups.
Yes, Pluto in the 11th house is going to be very intense, powerful, transformative group experiences. It's also going to be, your friends are going to be Plutonian. So they're either going to be very dedicated toward universal welfare and spirituality, or they're going to be very intense and powerful, or they may be disastrous. They could be, you know, friends that are like mafia or criminal or things like that. My best friend in life since the age of 16, since high school, has Pluto in the 11th house. In my Western horoscope, Pluto is the most powerful horoscope. There's a system called Astrodynes that rates the power of the planets, and Pluto is my strongest planet. So he gravitates. It's funny because the story that he tells, he was a year older than me. We were all in drama, and one of my older brothers was a year above him. And he came to our house a few times to visit my brother, because he was older than me and my brother was older than him. And he would come to visit my brother, and he always tells this story. He says one day he said, oh my God, that's the one I want to be friends with, the younger one, because I'm Plutonian, and he's got Pluto in the 11th house. The Pluto in the 11th house, I think, is also going to give very strong desires, major desires. The 3rd house and the 7th house are the daily desires. The 11th house is the major goals and desires. You'd want to look and see what's going on with the eldest sibling. Okay, the 11th house is the eldest sibling. So if the 11th house in the Vedic chart is very strong, then the the eldest sibling's probably going to be very powerful and special. If the 11th house is very afflicted or problematic, then the eldest sibling is probably going to be a big problem, you know, possibly a shorter life or something, who knows. If Pluto, but mainly what you want to look at is intense friends and intense groups. This is interesting because friends and groups are an 11th house matter. It's connected to the sign Aquarius, which, you know, friendships are a fairly light-hearted, even though you have deep friendships, friendships can come and go. It's more of a light-hearted thing. Not when Pluto's in the 11th house, then the friends become, you're not going to let go of those friends, those groups. It's going to be a very intense experience with friends and groups. Whereas, you know, generally friends and groups are, you know, they're friends. They're, you know, they're not relatives. But if you got Pluto in the 11th, your friends might be just like relatives for you. Pluto in the 12th house, you know, could be connected to moksha, could be connected to enlightenment. In the Western chart, the 12th house is the subconscious mind. And so with Pluto in the 12th house, you're usually going to find people who have an awful lot of, their lives are very strongly affected by unconscious issues. Unconscious. So the more evolution a person has, the more self-development a person has, the more their life is more simple, in the sense that they're clear-headed, they're simple, they're not being driven by subconscious attachments and things. But when a person's got an intense 12th house, you know, Pluto in the 12th house. So I have a brother with Pluto in the 12th house. Oh God. He's got Pluto, Mars, and Saturn in the 12th house, okay?
Okay.
Pluto, Mars, and Saturn
Oh
in
my
the 12th
God.
house. Now, one of my brothers, 4 or 5 years ago, he said, man, what happened to our other brother? He, you know, there was a year, he failed first grade. How do you fail first grade? Well, for 1 year, he was on a rampage. And nobody knew what he was angry about. So my other brother said to me, what was he so angry about? He was angry for like a full year. Nobody knew, still don't know. And that was something going on in the subconscious mind. Okay. So that's gonna last a whole lifetime. The more therapy, self-development that they can do, meditating, but really self-awareness becomes extremely important, because otherwise they will not understand why their behavior doesn't always match what life is throwing at them, because there's so much going on in the subconscious mind. But it can also be on the positive side for enlightenment. It can be wonderful. Yeah. So that's Pluto.
Amazing, sir. Very nice. I hope people can go and do this 12 houses Pluto, just like Rahu. They have loved your video about Rahu. I'll put the links of your books. These are the books which are currently, this is the book, the current book Sir has written. So many Braha Sutras. Sir has discussed so many of his sutras in our various sessions. You all can also go and look at those sessions, plus buy these books. We'll be giving the links in the description box. And also,
in this particular book, there's 216, 2 times 108. There's 216
In Braha.
different issues. They run the gamut. All the things that it came out of a workshop that I gave. The title was "What I Wish I Knew 40 Years Ago."
Okay.
With all kinds of different issues.
Yes. And the other book also, Sir has revised his books. Ancient Hindu Astrology. This book also is, we'll provide the links in the description box. Please go and buy these books. They are awesome books and a must-have in one's library. Those who are astrologers and doing astrology on a paid basis. These are the must-have books, I feel.
And they can get hardcovers or soft covers or ebooks.
Yes, ebooks are available, hardcovers, softcovers, everything. The links will be given in the description box along with the email ID of Sir. Last time I had given the email ID also. I don't know how many of you have used it. Thank you for watching this session, this awesome session by Sir, and giving wonderful comments on his videos. We are very, very thankful for that. You are enjoying his sessions. We are also thankful for that. Those who are new, please do like, join, subscribe, and share our work. Thank you. Thank you, Sir. Thank you for a wonderful session.
My pleasure. Thank you.